Hello friends, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome all of you to our discussion today on the constitutional history of China as part of topic 3 of paper 4, that is comparative government and politics. At the very outset, it needs to be mentioned, and I begin my discussion with a comment by a very famous constitutional expert, Casey Weir, who rightly said that constitutions can be described to be power marks or maps which prescribe the formal distribution of authority within a state. In this context, it needs to be noted that nearly all countries have constitutions, but only few have what we call constitutional rule. In fact, the concept of constitutional rule is practically a monopoly and a practice adopted by the Western liberal tradition, but the socialist tradition has discarded the idea and it negates the concept of having constitutional rule and differs predominantly from Western countries on this particular point. They reject the idea of constitutional rule. Against this background, the attempt of the present paper is to focus on the constitutional history and political traditions of China, primarily with the objective of highlighting the fact that comparative government and politics is not exclusively an Eurocentric discipline, but it touches and covers states from all parts of the world, Asia, Latin America, etc. Now, looking into the constitutional history of China, one can say that it has been primarily a product which has been deeply influenced by the ideas of Marx, Lenin, and Mao to a large extent. The basic objective of this paper to analyze the constitutional history is to understand the nature and structure of political institutions and governments of socialist states like China so that we can make a difference in their pattern of functioning and in their government and in the political institutions, their nature with liberal democratic countries. Now, generally we find that for the purpose of convenience and in order to make the study systematic, it is very important to divide it into certain parts. I have followed the same plan in this discourse and I have divided the paper into 3 main parts. In the first part, I shall discuss about I have given my introduction. In the second part, we shall touch upon the constitutional history of China. And in the third part, that is the concluding part, I shall put forward certain observations of my own. Now, turning to the second part, that is the constitutional history of China, I begin with a quotation of Hannah Pitkin, who wrote about the Chinese constitution and correctly said that the Chinese believe that the constitution is a characteristic way of life, the national character of a people, and a product of their particular history and social conditions. It is their ability to create something new, to innovate and launch something new. In this context, an analysis of the constitutional history and the various precedents show that China has been throughout its long history a land of turmoil and revolution. In fact, it was by 221 BC that the first Chinese ruler assumed the title of the first emperor of Chinese dynasty. The second dynasty to rule over China was the Sui. The dynasty ruled from 581 to 617 AD. They were followed by the Shang dynasty from 618 to 907 AD. Between 907 AD to 960 AD, China, however, faced a period of revolt, disunity, and chaos. The period of the Song dynasty in China is rightly called the golden period in Chinese history, which lasted from 960 AD to 1125 AD. Between 1280 AD to 1368, however, China unfortunately was ruled by the Mongols, who were regarded as foreigners, and through a national upsurge, the Mongols were finally expelled in 1368, after which the Qing dynasty came to be founded, who governed China till 1644 AD. The Qing dynasty was overthrown by the Manchu dynasty, and it can be said and interesting to note that it was during the Manchu dynasty that China witnessed both degradation as well as glory. China attained a golden age under the Qing era, but during the Manchu era, China was torn off into various areas of influence by Western powers. As a result of exploitation by Western powers, China began to suffer from untold misery. China lost to a great extent her status as an independent state, and also so often became a prey to exploitation by Western powers. In this context, it needs to be noted that under the leadership of Sun Yat-sen, a revolution was staged on China on the 10th of October 1911, and the Republic of China was established. But unfortunately, the provisional government, which was established by Sun Yat-sen, could not be successful and was meaningless, primarily due to the opposition by reactionaries. In 1923, the Kuomintang, a party organized by Sun Yat-sen, fought against the reactionaries and saved the Communist Party of China and saved the Republic, and Kuomintang continued to govern China till the end of the Second World War. In 1946, the Kuomintang government introduced a new constitution which was opposed by the Communist Party of China under Mao Zedong. The Communist Party emerged victorious, however, in 1949 after a civil war between the Communist forces and the Kuomintang. Since 1949, in fact, China has been under the Communist Party and has been slowly emerging now internationally as one of the major Asian powers. In this context, it is pertinent to mention a remark made by the famous French leader Napoleon, who said that the traditional opium eaters, who are the Chinese, it is better to keep them asleep, because if they wake up, they will surely shake the world. For a few years, the People's Republic of China did not have a formal constitution of their own. The Common Program was a provisional constitution based primarily on the principles that were devised by Mao. The first constitution of the People's Republic of China was declared in the year 1954. After this, two intervening constitutions, one in 1975, the other in 1978, came into being, and the current constitution now is that of 1982, which is now being followed despite several amendments being made to this constitution. What is striking and interesting to note is that despite no major changes occurring in the text of the constitution, changes in the structure of the Chinese government has led to significant changes in the conventions of the constitution. Now, a brief review of the constitutions of China shows that the People's Republic of China was proclaimed on 1st October 1949, and for the next 5 years, the People's Republic of China has been governed by the Common Minimum Program of 1949 with a particular and a certain degree of democracy. Under 1949, mention must particularly be made of Article 3, which leads to the protection of private property, and Article 13, which deals with uniting the bourgeoisie, and Article 30, assisting private enterprise. The first people's government was elected in 1949, which included a significant number of representatives from parties other than the Communist Party. Now, it is important to turn our attention to the Constitution of 1954, which actually is the first constitution of China. The National Congress was elected in September 1954 in China, although the work of drafting the constitution had begun 2 years earlier in 1952. On 24 December 1952, in fact, a resolution was moved by the Premier Zhou Enlai on behalf of the Communist Party to draft the new permanent constitution. The resolution was passed on 13 January 1953, but finally we find that a drafting committee for preparing the constitution led by Mao was appointed, and finally, exactly 5 years after the passage of the Common Minimum Program, on 20th September 1954, the first meeting of the National People's Congress unanimously approved the new constitution. This version has been called the 1954 Constitution. The constitutional framework, however, has undergone radical change and transformation by being influenced by the 1978 Constitution. The main object, however, of the 1954 Constitution has been to build up communism and socialism gradually. However, an important characteristic that needs to be noted with reference to socialism and communism is that it developed in a new way, in a new light, by being influenced by the principles and ideologies of Mao, and thus came to be called Maoism. The new Maoism was expected to be a new vision of totalitarian society, which was to be a sound departure from the orthodox ideas of Lenin and Stalin. In this context now, we need to know that the 1954 Constitution embodied a preamble and 108 articles which have been organized into 4 chapters. Chapter 2 of the Constitution sets up the pattern of government and the system of government, which has been composed of 6 structural parts. The highest organ of government was the legislature, that is the National People's Congress. It may be noted, and it is interesting to note, that there have been American scholarships on the 1954 Chinese Constitution who have either tended to examine the textual implications or analysis of the wordings of the Constitution or examined its practical applications. Jerome Cohen, for example, states that although the 1954 Constitution enumerates a number of aspirational principles that talks about guaranteeing freedom of speech and suffrage to the people, the actual implementation of these provisions in the Constitution, however, has hardly lived up to our own expectations. And in fact, it is said that the document remains more symbolically significant, although one cannot deny that the 1954 Constitution undoubtedly has played a vital role in the process of nation building in China. In 1960s, we find that Mao was quite concerned with the broad spectre of revisionism which had begun haunting China. China under Mao began the social education movement, which soon came to be merged with the Cultural Revolution. Cultural Revolution, in fact, was an attempt to root out Maoist opposition from persons at the top levels of the party. Ultimately, we find that the increasing involvement of the political life soon resulted in loss of peace and political stability in the country. Although Mao as a leader was successful in tackling the challenging leaders and putting forward a constitution to consolidate the victories of the Cultural Revolution on the one hand and make the roots of socialism strong on the other. The Constitution of 1954 has been replaced by the Constitution of 1975, which came into effect through a sudden announcement made in January 1975 and was adopted in January 1975. It was an document with an elaborate preamble but with only 4 chapters and 30 articles as compared to the old Constitution of 1954. The Constitution of 1975, in fact, was replaced by the Constitution of 1978, and Hua Guofeng emerged now in China as a vital leader who dealt very strongly with his opponents. And we find that under him, China achieved considerable amount of political stability. A very interesting thing to note regarding Chinese political history at this time was that the National People's Congress enacted a new constitution, and the new constitution was liberalized through major challenges, and the old constitution was avoided. In fact, it has been said beautifully that the 1978 constitution was a new constitution within the old framework. We now come to the present constitution of 1982. Hua, the leader, however, met decline by 1981, and Deng Xiaoping, the vice chairman, emerged as the most powerful chairman of power and authority. The Constitution of 1978, as a result, was replaced by a constitution in December 1982 by a new group of people, and the new constitution remains in operation at present, and China continues to be governed by it, although being amended in later years. The new constitution is composed of a preamble and 138 articles. The preamble upholds the policy of democratic dictatorship and believes that it shall abide by socialism under the guidance of Marxist-Leninist thought and the ideas of Mao. The Constitution believes in following an independent foreign policy and upholding the 5 principles of Panchshil, of peaceful coexistence. China, under the 1982 Constitution, has been described as a multi-dimensional unitary socialist state under people's democratic dictatorship led by the working class. It also has been successful in reviving the office of the president too. A very interesting development that took place during this time was that a measure of modest liberalization was introduced and authoritarian controls relaxed in China. Some of the major policies of Mao's policies were abandoned. In fact, in this context, it needs to be mentioned that the 1982 Constitution was born in a political environment where the past, including Mao's errors and almost all the Communist Party's errors, were examined, and the country's future, including the pursuit of economic reforms, was openly debated. The fundamental rights and duties of the citizens were greatly expanded, and Deng Xiaoping remained in power till 1997. Jiang Zemin, however, took over power after Deng Xiaoping, and the transition and the shift of power, balance of power, has been a smooth one with no violence, no revolution in China. The death of Deng, however, is significant to note because it marked the end of a particular style and era of leadership that China got under him. Jiang became extremely powerful during his rule, and a significant event in the history of China during the rule of Jiang was the transfer of Hong Kong, which had been a British possession, to China in 1997 after a gap of 156 years. Hong Kong remains an autonomous territory under the one country, two systems principle, and China particularly shows its insistence in maintaining cordial and mutual relations with other countries of the world. The emergence of liberalism, in fact, becomes evident in Chinese constitutional history and in the pattern of development of Chinese constitution from the visits by foreign dignitaries in China, most important being the American president, past American president, ex-American president Bill Clinton on the one hand, and the visit by Chinese leaders to foreign countries. The 1982 Constitution is a very significant one for us to study regarding any analysis on China's constitutional history because it reflects Deng Xiaoping's determination to lay a lasting institutional foundation for domestic stability and modernization. The new constitution provides a legal framework and which can bring about broad changes in China's social and economic institutions and governmental structure. The Constitution of 1982 has been subjected to several amendments, among which special mention should be made of the 1988 Constitution or change, 1993, 1999 and 2004. In 2004, guarantees regarding private property and human rights were included. It attempted to modify the Constitution in accordance with economic and political reforms of that period. The 1982 Constitution, in fact, is a very interesting one because not only is it lengthy, but it is a hybrid document with 138 articles. Large sections have been adapted from the 1978 Constitution, but many of its changes, however, have been derived from the 1954 Constitution as well. The new Constitution, that is the 19th Constitution, however, de-emphasizes class struggle and places the greatest priority on development, which shows a pragmatic outlook on the part of China to face the changing scenario of international relations. The 1982 documents reflects a more flexible and less ideological orientation of foreign policy since 1978. Phrases such as proletarian internationalism, social imperialism have been dropped, and rights and obligations of citizens have been set out in detail, far exceeding than that of the 1978 Constitution. On November 2002, Hu Jintao was elected as the Secretary General of the Communist Party of China, and later we find that he became the president in 2008 who promised to provide clean governance and corruption-free governance to China. Now, an account of the constitutional history and political legacies and development of China can never be complete unless we take into account an analysis of the relationship between China and Russia, the two of the greatest socialist states in the world. With reference to relations between China and Russia, it may be said that although the two states did not share a very cordial relation with each other under Mao, political compulsions and strategic interests, in fact, established proximity between them. The initiative taken by Gorbachev in this context is worth mentioning, and the visit to Moscow by Li Peng in 1990 further improved the relations between China and Russia, the two socialist states of the world. After the breakup of Soviet Union, which took place in 1991, great changes and strategic developments took place in the world and in the changing scenario of international relations. And in this context, it needs to be noted that both the China and the newly formed Russian Federation came close to each other primarily for political compulsions and also for the purpose of strategic interests. China seems to stress on economic development and social modernization and stability. China wanted to find some common grounds on several issues with powerful neighbors and powerful countries such as USA and Russia. Both America and China are being pragmatic in devising their plans for future development prospects. The Constitution of 1982, through successive amendments, reflects the embodiment of Marx, Lenin, and Mao's thought with suitable modifications from time to time. The new Constitution of 1982, in fact, is a very unique one since it sums up the historical legacies and the political traditions of China in a significant way and caters to the needs of the people and also meets the needs of socialist modernization. In this context, it needs to be noted, and here I conclude by saying that an analysis of China's constitutional history shows that it has faced a lot of conflicting realities and situations, and it has always been a land of turmoil and revolution from time to time. However, it is a state which has been influenced by the orthodox ideas of Marxism-Leninism, deeply influenced by Soviet Union, and on the other hand has devised a new form and a modified version of Marxism-Leninism in a new way which came to be known as Maoism in China. The greatest and the most striking feature of the political system and the political tradition of China, which needs to be noted, and with that I conclude, is that despite facing conflicting realities and having a strong historical legacy of dynastic rule, China shows a shift from orthodox communist order to a system of governance characterized by democratization and liberalization. It reflects a socialist tradition but with suitable modifications and a definite pragmatic outlook and a desire for modernization and liberalization to open up in the international world.